I understand that problem like really intimately as well. Like once you make the sale and you onboard your client, this is actually where the real sales begins. Because if you don't have them bought in internally, they don't use it and then they churn, whatever it is. Even if it's an agency or if it's software, it's sort of the same thing. Is that where the focus is for Onboard? Is it like for managing the projects of implementation and getting going? Or is it more looking at making sure that you have an opportunity for expansion revenue and retention? Is there a focus, or is it sort of the whole gamut of everything post-close?
If you try to be everything to everybody, you end up being nothing to everyone. So we have found that our sweet spot is growing SaaS companies that are sort of in that 50 to 200 employee range. That seems to be the sweet spot.
Jason, welcome to Product Growth Stories. I'm so happy to have you on the show. So we're going to talk about your business, Onboard.io. Can you tell me a little bit, like, why did you build this in the first place? What problem did you see where you could make a difference in the market?
Yeah, so to answer that, I'll tell you just a quick story about how I ended up here, because I'm not going to take credit for building this. The product has been around for a little bit, but about 5 years ago, a very good friend of mine asked me to help with some due diligence on a company he was considering investing in, Onboard. And I did that due diligence. At the time, I was leading sales, customer success at a MarTech startup here in Atlanta called CallRail. We were going through crazy growth, closing.
Heard of CallRail?
Yeah. So very transactional, product-led growth. And when I saw the product and the problem it solved, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. Like, yes, invest in them. Yes. And I want to use this product. The problem it solved, Onboard solved, and still solves today, is all this hard work goes into closing that customer. There's so much that has to happen. Stars need to align. Everybody needs to be, in a good mood, and finance needs to be on board with everything. No pun intended. You close that deal, and then so many things can go wrong after that contract is closed. And it happens a lot. And not only
what are some examples of the kinds of things that you wouldn't know if you weren't in the industry, like that go wrong after you've signed the deal?
Yeah. So oftentimes that customer is sort of left wondering what's next, right? I signed, I'm excited. What do we do now? Oftentimes that customer is given some sort of an onboarding call with some, basic tasks or a layout or, some sort of timeline of what needs to happen. And then inevitably what happens is that onboarding runs long, things slip through the cracks, communication is not great on either side. And inevitably you have stakeholders on either side that are just sort of wondering, right, like what's next, who's responsible for what. And then on larger sales, larger deals, mid-market and above, enterprise especially, you've got other internal stakeholders that are constantly asking that customer success manager, whoever's in charge for the onboard or implementation, what's going on. And that's just extra work for that person to try to scrounge up the information or even be able to answer it objectively and honestly and accurately. So we, at the time, there was definitely a need. Fast forward a couple of years, had an opportunity to join that same company and lead go-to-market. And so I joined in August of 2025, and we're sort of going through our next phase. We've revamped the product, we've revamped our pricing, our offering, pushing out a ton of new products and features and updates all the time, and really listening to the market. And at a time where every day some new crazy advancement comes out, AI is
crazy right now. Yeah. So I understand that problem like really intimately as well. Like once you make the sale and you onboard your client, this is actually where the real sales begins. Because if you don't have them bought in internally, they don't use it and then they churn, whatever it is. If it's even if it's an agency or if it's software, it's sort of the same thing. Is that where the focus is for Onboard? Is it like for managing the projects of implementation and getting going? Or is it more looking at making sure that you have an opportunity for expansion revenue and retention? Is there a focus, or is it sort of the whole gamut of everything post-close?
It's all of it. And I think it really depends on, we talk to our clients and we say, the software itself, there's a lot of runway for you to grow into and expand the use case. but we would definitely start sort of crawl, walk, run with the methodology. Like, what is the most, where does it hurt the most right now? Where is the most immediate need? And sometimes their post sale, like immediately after, is not that big of an issue. Sometimes it happens, at 3 months after the signature or 6 months. And, you'll hear it all the time. If you're on an annual contract, if you're starting the renewal conversation at month 11, you're 8 months too late, probably. So there's just those constant touch points and constantly adding value that a product like Onboard can help with that.
And when I imagine, especially given, your GTM experience and, now you're on the team, do you is the product opinionated? Because I imagine that you personally know a lot of these holes. When you look into a client for Onboard, I imagine you could see them right away, like, ooh, there's revenue leaking right there. Does the team help identify those, or is it sort of, how does that work? I'd love to hear how that works.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, the answer is absolutely. I made it a point, personally, my preference has always been to sell a product that I really believe in and that I really understand intimately, the challenges and the customers. I really understand it because I lived it in some capacity. And in this case, this is very personal, professionally personal, I guess. But yeah, the design of the product, any decisions that we make are guided by a couple of different stakeholders. And I'm not going to apply any percentages or weights of it's very much getting real-time feedback from our customers. We've got amazing customers that are always giving us awesome constructive criticism on ways that the product can improve. So that's an obvious input. But yeah, absolutely. A lot of this is coming from the things that I have seen and the pains that I've experienced. And, so a lot of the inputs coming from that, but then you can't always be playing catch up. We always want to be looking ahead. How can we continue to differentiate in the market? How can we continue to add value? How can we leverage all the cool stuff that's coming at us from every angle? So the other input is also, how do we continue to move forward and add value for our customers and future customers? So yeah, the short answer to your question is absolutely. I have my input all over this product in a good way. I hope.
That's fun. That's always fun. If you can have an imprint and you can take it to market, that's the best. Yeah. So I forget who told me this. I remember a mentor of mine told me that anytime anyone's confused about the next step, if they're not clear about the next step, this is actually going to affect your retention, no matter what it is. If they don't know exactly what's happening now, why are we here and what happens next? And I think the thing that I really learned recently is that this is more true of very smart people. So apparently, people who label themselves who think of themselves as intelligent often don't want to look dumb. They don't want to say hey, I have no idea what what's supposed to happen. So they won't tell you. And then this somehow affects your retention because they don't feel like they can ask, but they don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. And again, when you say that you understand this problem from your viewpoint, I think everybody has, because that experience, even thinking of it, it's not apples to apples, but, even thinking of, I come from the hospitality industry. In college, I waited tables, which is an awesome profile for anyone in revenue roles, people that waited tables.
That's a good,
I
like that.
My favorite hiring profile. Because you've seen everything, you have no idea who's about to sit at your table, and you've got to figure out how to make them happy and buy that bottle of wine or whatever it is that you're getting. You're trying to push that. But yeah, you order your food. So there's the whole buildup of the menu and what are you going to order? And then you order the food. And then there's that awkward waiting period between the time that you order the food and the food arrives. And the restaurants that separate themselves are the ones that figure out how to make that experience pleasant. So thinking about it through the lens of a service or software that you're selling, that gap between contract close to first value, we talk about time to value. How can you shorten that as much as possible and make that experience as not just as quick, but as efficient, as pleasant as possible, is really critical. And that ties in directly to what you're saying of if you don't know that next step, you almost feel helpless, you feel frustrated, and the sentiment, your trust in that decision starts to drop pretty rapidly.
The psych level goes down.
Yeah, you get that buyer's remorse. You never want that. You never want buyer's remorse.
So, I mean, I can see how anybody could use this, but since you are doing go to market, who are you going after the hardest? Where do you see the best fit, and how are you taking it to market? That was like 8 questions, but
no, they all can sort of be answered in one. Yeah, it's been fascinating. This is the stuff that I obsess over and I absolutely love, is figuring out, really getting very precise with that ICP, because without that, it could be disastrous for a startup. If you try to be everything to everybody, you end up being nothing to everyone. So we have found that our sweet spot is growing SaaS companies that are sort of in that 50 to 200 employee range. That seems to be the sweet spot. We definitely have customers on the smaller side of that, and we definitely have customers way on the bigger side of that. But the core is really in that area, and that's who we're proactively going after. Inbound, we get everything. It's across the board. It's really kind of wild, the type of stuff that we get. Everything from a trial that just signed up the other day is the World Surf League. So yeah, they need customer onboarding too, I guess. And we've had
that's actually a big customer though. They aren't small.
Yeah, no, I know. We've had funeral homes. So there's just they're really
joke, but I feel like that's the final onboarding.
That is, you're once and done. Yeah, there's not customer life cycle isn't great on that one. Anyway, it's all right. We'll both go to hell. So the reality is that those companies that are in that sort of sweet spot, they are kind of either graduating out of using manual processes for onboarding, and they're smart enough to get in front of the problem before it becomes a major issue, or they've already blown past that and the cracks are starting to show. It's one of those things where, like, if you're growing, you're just growing and you don't have time to stop and look at what's going on. All the problems are not as profound. You don't really feel it until things really start to break, or you're able to have somebody kind of take, that outside perspective coming in with fresh eyes and say, hey, like, this is really messed up. Like, we're churning customers because of this. Our time to value is bad. Our CSAT is bad. Our NRR is taking a hit. All of those things tie back to that onboarding experience. Depending on where you're citing, anywhere from 20 to 40% of SaaS churn is pinned directly to those first 90 days. So if you screw up the onboarding, you're flirting with a disaster. So yeah,
absolutely. And so you're focusing mostly on SaaS, which makes sense. And are there other? And I'm just curious. Like, are there other verticals? Because I imagine, I'm also curious about this. Are you able? I feel like with this kind of product, you might be able to get some metrics that you can tie back to revenue. Like, if you're able to say, like, hey, this process seems like to have affected retention, there may be a ability to track behaviors that you're managing to retention and revenue. That would be an amazing way to be able to market it, to say, like, look, we can substantiate claims based on our, the data. Do you have any programs like that in the works?
Yeah. So one of the first things it's a fantastic question. And, the way that I learned how to sell, and I think the way that every company should think about how they position their product and sell their product is, what value are we providing, right? It's not, so it just doesn't become some shelfware. How can you, at the end of the day, have your champion defend the spend of this product? And when I started to interview our customers before I decided to join the company in August of last year, I noticed that some of those customers, which were going to churn unless we fix something, were like, yeah, it's cool, but we don't know exactly the value that we're getting. We don't know that it's improving X and doing Y so that we're getting Z from it. And I was like, oh, we got to fix this immediately. So we've been spending a lot of product cycles on being able to provide that visibility. So we've got a KPI dashboard that shows the most important metric that we track right now is days to launch. And we're building off of that to create additional milestones that are customizable by the company. So it's not going to be like SaaS best practice or benchmarks. It'll be whatever company, if it's an agency, if it's a fintech, if it's a SaaS startup or World Surf League, and any company that says our first time to value is when this happens with our customers, and we want to move that forward because we know that by moving that forward by X days, we see a Y increase in customer satisfaction based off post onboarding surveys. Well, what does an increase in CSAT mean? An increase in CSAT means quicker to expand, quicker to refer, and quicker to be a case study or testimonial, and knowing how hungry the LLMs are for G2 reviews and Capterra reviews. They're quicker to go on and say how great their experience was. So that time to value and those days to launch, shortening that as much as possible has been sort of our North Star, and figuring out more ways to enable that. So we're working on a few additional metrics and milestone trackers that we'll be releasing shortly. But right now it's primarily days to launch, and then some additional engagement metrics that we're going to work on figuring out how to tie it back directly to each customer's actual revenue. So long story short, it is top of mind. We want to do it in a way that actually makes sense and is actionable for each individual customer.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm thinking about, like, I know how HubSpot, they have their single customer health metric that helps them like predict churn. I think they weight a bunch of things now, whereas at the beginning it was very simple. But I love time to first value. I mean, that seems like a really good, obvious choice, because that's what we're all trying to do, right? Like actually make a noticeable difference that they care about, not just internally.
we've all had bad experiences, right? Like we've all been onboarded. It's not just your own business. Like you have gone through an onboarding process that was painful. And it's happened since I've been at Onboard, where I've literally been like, I'm going to give you my software for free because this is, you can't,
Please fix your onboarding.
Yeah. I mean, it becomes one of those things where I've got this mission to fix onboarding. It's like a wholesome, like I want to solve this problem for everybody, so no one has to go through bad onboarding ever again. So yeah, everyone should buy our software or one of our competitors, so you don't have to deal with this ever again, preferably ours, but whatever, as long as you fix your onboarding so no one has to go through this. Throwing a Notion doc in front of me and saying, here's your onboarding process, and it's like 60 steps, and I don't know where you are in the process or where I'm supposed to do next, is like, what are we doing? Or sharing a Google sheet with me, or it's just like, it's 2026. What are we doing?
Yeah, I love it. Well, so apart from using your software, which sounds like we all should, what do you think, like, other than that, what is the biggest change that anybody could make to improve? Like, what's the one thing they could do to improve their onboarding if you're a business owner in 2026? Like, what would make the biggest difference? If you could give some advice, parting advice.
Yeah, I think doing a routine, I think surveying your customers and asking for feedback on the onboarding process, hearing directly from your customers on how,
just ask them.
I mean, it's amazing how I always say feedback is a gift. And again, we're really lucky that our customers are just fantastic and give such great feedback. And I even have one of our newer clients that just signed, she'll sign things. She sends me like three things a day. And she'll send things like, from your worst customer. And I'm like, that is not even funny. You are so far from that. You give me so much feedback and I love it. But yeah, it's amazing how much amazing feedback you get just by asking your customers. So I think start by just stop assuming that what you're doing is working and ask for feedback. Yeah, it's that simple.
I love it. I love that advice. I love that. It's very doable. We can all do that with Jason. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thank you.